Currently I am a 19-year-old lady residing in southern Texas. However, I've been experiencing some sort of paranormal activity for as long as I can remember, and I have lived in 10 states throughout the course of my life. No matter where I am or who I'm with, stuff always happens. Also, there have been things that I've seen that have happened on completely different sides of the country. The earliest paranormal experience I remember happened with my mother. My mom's family lived in Anchorage, Alaska, but my mom and I lived in San Diego, California at the time, and we were driving up there to visit family for the summer. According to my mom, I was around 4 years old during this trip. We had stopped somewhere on the Canadian border and stayed the night at a motel there. During the night both my mother and I woke up suddenly because of the sound of running water, but when I opened my eyes I saw blood stains and what seemed like indentations of body parts on the ceiling. Even if I wasn't 4 years old, I'd be really freaked out. My mom grabbed our stuff and we left to continue driving in the middle of the night. She claims to have seen the same stuff I did. So, that's probably not attached to me, maybe that motel room, but I wanted to share that specific experience because it's the first I remember. Things happened a lot in my childhood, and what I remember happening back then was always much more vivid than the things I experience now. Most of the time my parents just said it was my imagination. My mom has seen some of the stuff I have, but she is ashamed. I guess she doesn't like to admit to seeing things after the fact. When I was in elementary school in San Diego, California, I saw lots of people that weren't really there. Sometimes I think there were more people that weren't real, but I didn't know, like I couldn't tell that they were spirits or whatever. Nothing was really bad or mean when I was little. I just never felt like I was totally alone. I was 13 years old when we started moving all over the country, and I was having to move in with various family members. I was very rebellious and depressed, and I was always extremely stressed out, which probably had something to do with the activity in my life becoming scarier. When I was 13 I was living with my grandmother, on my mom's side of the family, and I always saw shadows out of the corner of my eye. Which I know is pretty common, but I saw other things too, like little animals, and a distortion of reality. I see cats, mice, rats, and lizards constantly. They just run around, sometimes they just lay down in one spot, but they just fade away after a minute or so. Seeing all the animals started when I was living with my grandmother though, and it still happens. Now by distortion of reality I mean like it seeming like the ground is waving like water, and I get tunnel vision very bad. I told my grandmother about what was happening, and she said that some people are blessed enough to see everything in the world and not limited to what we want to see, or what other people want us to see. She told me that she has similar experiences, but at some point things had gotten too intense for her and she discovered that smoking cigarettes made her see less things. By the time I lived with her she was a chain smoker. But she comforted me by helping me feel not alone or crazy. When I was 15 and 16 years old I lived with my mother and stepfather in Virginia. We lived in the middle of nowhere. The closest city was Harrisonburg, Virginia. I'm pretty sure that the house we lived in was haunted, on top of me seeing things, because my mom and stepfather also experienced things, like hearing footsteps coming up the stairs and stopping at the door. We opened up the door but nobody was there. We also experienced doors opening and closing and the lights going on and off. But in the surrounding area, whenever I was in mom's car or on the school bus, I would see a lady that looked like she was floating. She looked like a young African American lady in a torn-up white dress. She would be in random fields or in the middle of the road sometimes. No one else ever saw her, and my mother kept telling me I needed help. So when I was 16 years old she forced me to get mental help, and I spent about 2 months in a mental hospital. They said I was a schizophrenic with bipolar depression. But I refused to take medicine, and eventually my mother took me back home, but she never took anything I said seriously. So I left home when I was 17 and couch surfed around Western Washington state. I know I'm not really crazy, doctors just don't have a good explanation for people like myself. I've never really heard things, like there are no voices telling me to kill people or anything, just seeing people, shadows, animals, orbs. Which brings me to another point, orbs. I don't know much about them. But I have had experiences with them. A lot of them I've seen have entered me. One night I was with a group of friends in Portland, Oregon. We were hanging out in a cemetery, obviously waiting to see ghosts. I know that's really not cool, but us teenagers do stupid stuff sometimes. Anyway, I was waking through the cemetery holding hands with my boyfriend at the time, and I saw an orb and it flew really fast right at me, and I swear I felt it. Even my boyfriend felt uneasy and asked me what happened. It felt like my chest got really tight and cold. That was the first time that happened to me. It has happened 2 times since then. Now I'd like to tell you, the reader, something that was very traumatizing for me, so if you need to stop reading, feel free. Last year I found out I was pregnant. I was around 4 months, and one night I had a nightmare that I was drowning in a sea of blood. I woke up crying and screaming. I was in so much pain I couldn't move. And when I was in bed screaming, I saw what looked like a huge group of shadow people circling me, and I realized the bed was soaked in blood. My fiancé called an ambulance and I was taken to the emergency room. Turns out I had a miscarriage. It was so brutal and terrible, and I can't help but think that maybe something took my unborn child. I just figured I would put my story out there and see if there are any more people like me. Also, if maybe someone could shine light on maybe why this activity seems like it's attached to me. Thank you for reading all this.